welcome. I am your host, Derek Tyler Attico. This is Soul of the Story, Book 3, Chapter 2. And I am here with a guest that I am really excited to have a conversation with, an author, a midwife, Winifred Burton. Winifred, thank you for coming on Soul of the Story today. How are you?
I am doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm really excited to have this conversation. I don't know how much of our base knows about midwifing. I don't even know if that's the correct term. But I'm excited to have this conversation with you about it. And as an author, there's a lot we can talk about. But first of all, I'd like to start, as I do with most of my guests, in their childhood. And I want to ask, what was that first like creative spark in your childhood that steered you towards art or towards, I don't know if it was writing or towards some form of art. Do you remember what that first creative spark was?
I would say the very first creative spark was dissociation for a lot of reasons that sort of got me off into books, right? And so I was the kid that, I would be gifted these huge trash bags of books that were cleared from spaces that were donated or trash. And I would just go spelunking in all these books and all these stories. And between that and just natural curiosity about drawing and things like that, I've always been really into making things, specifically with my hands.
Oh, wow. Okay. So we're going to talk about that. But first, what age were you when you started reading all of these different books? And what kind of books were they? Were they like, what genres were they?
Oh my gosh. So when I say donated, I mean literally trash. Like one of my relatives would do things like go and clear out space, like trash hauling, right? And so we would just come back with these garbage bags full of books. And so like my first novels as a kid, I skipped a lot of things. I read a lot of stuff that was around the house. So for me, my earliest books were literally like Danielle Steele and Stephen King. That's every elementary school kid to be reading, right?
Right. Wow. Okay.
And that gave me a natural curiosity about some of the things I read about and heard about. I was one of those kids or one of those people who'd read things before they'd actually said them out loud. And so I was just mispronouncing everything all the time. Everything in terms of books from like political commentary, like PJ O'Rourke, which is really weird in hindsight.
How old were you?
Like 7 or 8 at the most.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's good though, right? Because you're reading material that's technically above that age level,
Yes.
So that's great.
Definitely reading above age level, because I would get to school and people were like, well, where are you getting this from? Where does this come from? And I'd tell them, they'd be like, oh, well, I guess that's okay because you read it in a book and books are good. Maybe ask your parents to bring you different books. It's kind of a conversation I had a lot. But yeah, my infamous thing is having read Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas before I was 10.
Wow.
That's the best scared straight tactic ever, by the way.
Right. It's so interesting because for me, it's a similar thing. My parents would take me to like films, and so they would take me to like almost like anything and everything like that they wanted to see. So I saw like the early Bond films, and I couldn't have been more than like around the same age, like 7, 8, watching like Sean Connery, or I remember watching like early George Lucas THX 1138 stuff that's really above a kid to see, but they would take me to see it, and they would be like, well, as long as it's not like gratuitous sex or violence, hey, let them be open to it and adjusted to it. But I think that does something for you and for your brain, right? To help start to develop those things that make you an artist. What do you think about that?
I would agree. I think the developing brain and the developing mind, I think it probably warped me in some ways that were both good and bad. I've always wanted to go back and revisit some of the things because I burned through a lot of your like Western canon type stuff and that
Sure.
age, like before I like hit adolescence. And part of me would like to go back and revisit and see how some of it hits me now. But at the same time, I feel like there's enough to read in the world that maybe isn't the best use of my time, right? Because it's not as if there's any shortage of those ideals or those settings in the modern world, right? That haven't been reinforced and done to death. And so I think what it gave me was a toolbox, both linguistically and just culturally, right? Because if you're a poor kid growing up in like a really sheltered environment, it's literally entire worlds that you just didn't know it exists. And some of them are really far away and some of them are just, across town.
Sure. And I think that's part of the beauty of reading is that reading, is time travel. Reading takes you to places that you just can't go or can't go immediately. Whether it's distance or whether it's through time or through history. And it also, of course, it educates us and opens our consciousness to new things and new ideas. So you said that you also learned to work with your hands. When did that start? Was that after reading or the same time?
I think it's just something that develops in parallel. I haven't been able to. I've been so transient in pursuit of midwifery the last few years, so I haven't been able to maintain some of the things. So, like, I card and spin wool, for example, as well as knitting, drawing. I think the thing that really got me into meditative handwork, because again, for me, this is about neurology to a certain extent, because I'm very much on the spectrum, as well as being hyperactive in a lot of ways. And so for me, sitting down with elders to pick and shell beans or to clean greens, for example, like we'd go out to these U-pick places, in nice weather, and we'd pick all this produce and then come home and collectively prepare it. And that gave me a lot of different experiences. But again, that sort of meditative, doing things with my hands repeatedly, like that repetitive movement really, I think, locked in some things for me.
Wow. So do you think that those experience from the reading and these very tactile, almost earthly experiences, right? Digging into the earth, pulling produce out of the earth and then the meditative, do you think that helped you traverse to writing?
I think in the sense that it requires a kind of faith and labor. This is something I've learned as I've gotten into growing things myself. There's just a certain amount of faith required to put this tiny thing in dirt, leave it alone, truly leave it alone, and then hope something wonderful happens. And I think writing is a little similar to that for me, in that if I just keep showing up, eventually something great will happen. The showing up and the consistency is, a challenge, right?
Right.
I guess if I think of my writing as a crop in that sense, right? And being a faithful steward of my creative process, that I think can translate. Yeah.
Wow. So let's just take a little half step back. So when you were dealing with the produce and all that, did you actually learn some farming?
No, that all came as an adult. I come from sharecropping people. And so I feel like that connection, that yearning, I came by that honest. I feel like that just came with me installed, right? But as far as the actual knowledge and how to do those things, that's something that's still very much a work in progress for me. And I don't have those skills yet.
Okay. I years ago, I guess 10 plus years ago now, I started to get into farming. And oh my God, loved it. I want to see that I want to get back to. But one of the things that I really enjoy your website. One of the things I loved about it is that you describe yourself as a Midwestern. Correct me if I'm wrong about this. Midwestern granddaughter of the Great Migration by way of Mississippi. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, can you please say more about that? And you just spoke about that you have uh, sharecroppers in your genealogy. Can you please say more about all that?
Sure. So I am 1.5 generations out from sharecropping, and I say that because my maternal grandmother did some of that work as a child, up until her tweens, I want to say. And then eventually they moved north from Mississippi. I come from people who lived in places in Mississippi that no longer exist because of population decline, right? And so that definitely had, so I have this really specific silent gen context as a child, like these people who were born in the 30s, who endured all of these really unspeakable experiences, and are suddenly living in this place that is better in certain ways and worse in others, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that had a profound impact on me. I went to Mississippi as a child every summer for a while. And so I like to make that connection for all sorts of reasons, both for personal and somewhat political, because I feel like as Black people, it is really common that we are, quote, lost or severed, and that there's truth to that. But part of that journey for me was realizing Mississippi is enough, and Mississippi is close, and I that's enough for me. Yeah.
Everything you're saying is resonating with me. So, you just mentioned that when you were a child, you used to go. You said you used to go to Mississippi like every summer.
Mm-hmm.
So, before that, were you more of a urban city kid?
Oh my, yes. I am still very much. I'm a little confused in terms of location. I would like to wander off into a bog and stay there. I think that is. I joke about being a Sasquatch because I feel that's what the Times ask of me. They would like me to wander into the wilderness and stay there for good, but I'm doing my best. I definitely grew up in like a very middling city. I think when I lived in Norway, people would say, "Oh, well, this is a big city." I was like, I guess, for here that is, but I think of the place where I grew up as very small town. I would think the demographics would probably say a little bit otherwise, but on the smaller end of very, very urban, very segregated Midwestern place. And interesting in that it provided me a lot of opportunities that I don't think I would have come by in other places or in other ways. And so I appreciate that. Sure. So one of the weirder things about me, and there's a list, is that I went to a school that is that's based in a zoo.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
You heard me correctly. The school is located at a zoo.
Okay.
And it's a special program, and you get all this environmental training, and it's this educational experience. There are kids who are junior zookeepers for part of their time. Yeah. And that's a pretty unique program. And so that's one of the experiences. I have a friend who's a teacher, and I was looking up the former instructors there who have since passed on. And he's like, yeah, I could tell this was a district with like money. And it was a public school. I didn't have to pay for it. I couldn't have afforded to if I had the opportunity to do so. Right. But that was sort of what I mean about the environment. So there were a lot of programs, enrichment programs, I think, where there was that moment at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, where we still were sort of trying to do things better. And in a way, like in a tangible way with money, right? And I was a beneficiary of that in terms of education. So I had what I've now come to understand as a world-class education for someone from my demographic and background. Yeah, and that really served me well.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see how it would, and just open you up to new things. I think that's what programs like that. Um, I don't know if they're designed to do that. Maybe that's the hope that they do that. And there's obviously not enough of them,
No.
and that's why the endowment for the arts is so important, and not even just the arts, but the arts, the sciences, zoology, all of these things is why that's why they're so important. And I know I'm preaching to the choir. Uh, um,
Cosign.
um, Great, right, exactly. Cosign. Um, so okay, so I wanna move ahead a little bit. So, can you talk to me a little bit about like your first experiences writing, whether it was, and when I say writing, I'm like whether it was like high school or later in college, but something that was of a longer form, and you realize that, oh, this is something I really enjoy doing.
Sure. My very first writing attempts were, and this is exclusive Winifred lore because I don't think I've ever mentioned this in public before, but those Daniel Steele novels always had a poem in them. And so I started writing really bad Daniel Steele flavored poetry as a child. Because
That's
what else
great.
are you going to do when you're 8, right? Um,
Right.
my longer attempts at story writing actually came in the form of screenplays in my early 20s. And I didn't really resonate with that. Like the visual aspects of it, I think hampered me when I got into like narrative prose because you're like a lot of beginning writers, you try to like you're trying to block the story, like the plot, like you're trying to
Right.
just
Right.
describe movements and things that aren't necessary on the page.
Right.
But getting to that and then finishing some work, I'm thinking, okay, I can actually do this. I can actually finish something. That's good. Let's start there and then make it better. I didn't actually start showing my work to people and feeling comfortable and confident in the work that I produced for a very long time. I would basically bury it in the backyard. You would have to threaten me to find out that I was a writer. It would be like on pain of death. It wasn't something I talked about, and so I made a lot of progress in that area. Yeah.
But you continue. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but it really sounds like even though you didn't like announce to the world or announce to other people, oh, I'm a writer or I'm writing. It sounds like internally and physically you kept continuing. You kept writing. You kept
Absolutely.
doing this. Yeah, which speaks volumes, right? And says that writing is something that was inside you back from the Daniel Steele poem
Wow.
days.
You didn't even torture me to get that info. I just volunteered it. That's one of
Right.
those
Oh,
things on the internet. They said Jesus couldn't have gotten that out of me, but yeah.
right. So that's wonderful. I also started in screenwriting, but I just love screenwriting. But it's very interesting what you're saying because not every medium is for everyone.
Yeah.
But what I love about your story is that didn't turn you off from writing. You took from that. Oh, I may not feel a certain way about this medium, but I still want to write. I still am going to write. You know, and is that fair to say? Is that what I
No,
got from what?
it is fair to say. And I think what worked for me was understanding that what I was visualizing, what I was experiencing, I actually had a better way to express that uh,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like narrative prose versus like visual images. Because I can sort of do that work, but it's not my forte. And it's not like a native experience for me. Whereas reaching into that toolkit, and I feel like this is what all of those early books gave me, which was just a reference, right? So a lot of good writing, or a lot of writing that resonates with people, resonates with them because they understand the context that you're building, right, and the larger world.
Right.
And I feel like having read any and everything under the sun, like by the pound as a child, really gave me just a larger grounding so that I could speak other people's languages in ways that they would understand what I was saying with my work.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. I can see that. And we're definitely going to start to talk about your midwifing. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you've been I guess, acknowledged for. And looking through some of the things, can you talk a little bit about the accolades or awards that you've gotten, or acknowledgments that you've gotten for your writing? I found those very interesting as well, as I'm sure our audience would.
Sure. So the big success for me for the last year or so is that for whatever reason, I wrote a story that was published in 2024, I believe, that just so happens to be about Mississippi vampires and some Sunflower County vampires in Mississippi, which, as we all know, turned out to have a little bit of a bump in popularity last year, right?
I don't know why, but yeah.
And that for me came about because I really wanted to speak to what it's like to be even moderately queer or non-gender conforming as a Black woman in a really Southern context, and in a Black Christian Southern context, and also in Mississippi, right? And like being that person who goes away and comes back, and what that feels like as an adult who has seen the wider world and is now back in the confines of this really difficult social situation. And that resonated with people. So I did that, and the references are people saying, "Hey, do you have anything else that we could publish that could?" Because we'll just take it if you have it, especially if it's related to that. So I'm talking about Blood Claim, which was in the anthology that was nominated for Shirley Jackson Award, and that was really exciting. That was really wonderful to hear that spoke to people the same way it came out of me, which is, you know what this juke joint needs? There's even a juke joint. Is vampires. Yeah.
I think it's interesting because, the public sees vampires, but us as writers, I look at what you did, I look at what Ryan Coogler did, and just the idea of vampires. The reason that vampires have played so well for so long is in my opinion and my observation as a professional, is not because they're vampires, but because they're used as a vehicle to, and in many ways as an analogy for something else.
Absolutely.
Right? He's using it for one thing, you're using it for something else. And speak a little bit about that specifically. You just did a little bit, but can you do that a little bit more for your story and why you chose vampires specifically?
Well, you're asking the same question that my writing and critique partner asked me. He said, why does this have to be vampires? And I think it is because of there's, I don't want to say overdone, but they're so popular, right? They've been consistently popular for over a century now in popular media. And for me, the answer was culture terraforming. And you see a little bit of this in Sinners as well, but it is, how do you, as a person, transmit an idea and an urgency to that idea with, basically magic, right? Vampirism.
Right.
You're converting people whose interests and needs for survival suddenly have matched your own, right? And what I was trying to do with Blood Claim is, if we wanted to reclaim the South, how might you go about that? How would you navigate people who don't want any trouble, and Mrs. So-and-so has been good to me for all these years, and we're just going to ride that out because it's working fine so far? How do you navigate that? Well, if you turn folks, they might feel different.
Right. They'd have no choice but to feel different, right?
They're probably going to feel their needs and desires and urges would change, right? And so one of the things I'm guilty of as a writer is always monsters are my friends, right? That's why I write horror, because what terrifies me about the world is usually not what bothers other people, right? And it is what we do to each other as regular human beings. Yes. And so I use horror as a device to speak to that, and as a way to accomplish some things sometimes. And also, I'm just a really big believer in, if you're afraid of me, I'm going to give you something to be scared of.
Might as well, right? Since you're already there, right? So I'll just give you something.
I'm already angry. So, you know, that's how I see it. Yeah.
No, I totally feel you on that. That's amazing. Can you talk a little bit about the Voodoo Knots workshop? What exactly?
Yeah, so that is an amazing thing that happened to me. There are a dozen different writing workshops, right? Lots of prestigious ones. And when Voodoo Knots came on the scene, I was like, I think they were in their third year by the time that I became a Voodoo Knot. And they're on hiatus for right now because all of those people who founded Voodoo Knots are working writers, and they're, in my opinion, juggernauts. I really respect them and their work, and what they've done to give back. So Voodoo Knots is a Pan-African virtual writing workshop, and Black folks all over the world. At the time, I happened to be in Norway, as did one of my fellow Voodoo Knots, who's just across town, Lara. But we were representing from the continent, from Northern Europe, of course, the United States, and the Caribbean were represented. There's just a lot of folks from all over. And we got together for, I think it was about 4 days to write. And what became Blood Claim actually started in that workshop.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
No, I was going to ask, what led you to Norway? That's obviously something that I would love to know about as well.
Well, I always say nothing makes friends like new money, and Norway is new money, right? And so I went and searched. My professional life in terms of money earning has traditionally been in women's and children's healthcare, and they have some of the biggest gaps in staffing, and they pay well, right? And so I thought, I ran out of states I'd like to live in, because I've lived in a lot of different places in the U.S. And I was on vacation, and I happened to visit Sweden and Norway at the time. And I thought, I could live here, I guess. This could work. And 8 months later, I was there, and I'd passed my language exams, and off I went.
I love that. You just did it. You're like, I could do this. This seems like a cool place. And
that is how I tend to run my life, which is really wonderful in the sense that if I want it, it's mine. But it's also a little bit challenging because once I have it, it's mine.
It's brave, though. It's brave. So many people, at least I feel that I know people that don't take those steps. And then, for me personally, I never want to be, 80, 90, and be like, oh, shoulda, woulda, coulda. I want to be like, I did. Even if I fail, that's fine. But at least make the attempt. At least do the thing. And, if you fall on your ass, you fall on your ass. But you've done the thing, and you went and did the thing. You did the thing. I love that. So, okay, now, speaking about doing the thing, now I would really like to know about your journey into midwifing and how the etymology of that, the origins of that. Can you please speak to that?
Yes. So part of my anachronistic behavior is that part of me really loves the fact that most people think midwives are extinct for whatever reason, and I don't know why that is. But I grew up in a medical adjacent household. So one of my relatives was a nurse. Other relatives worked in healthcare administration. And so I was always just sort of around things. I also took care of one of my grandparents when they were very ill when I was a child. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, I've always just sort of been in the mix in terms of healthcare and reading any and everything. Medical textbooks were really exciting to me. And so, I had someone who had surgery when I was a kid, and they were like, I got you a video of the surgery. And I was like, yes. So I was super excited because, that's a normal child thing to do.
Of course.
And I've just sort of been on that trajectory. And then once I realized that midwives are still real, you know, I've wanted to do that since I was like 19. And then I ran pretty hard for midwifery. Part of me is still trying to outrun midwifery, if I'm completely honest, because it's a very intense work that's involved. And the training is, every midwife who works will tell you that being a midwifery student is the hardest thing in the world until you become a working midwife, which is true, but your average midwifery student doesn't particularly love to hear that.
I'm sorry. I just occurred to me that maybe I should stop you for a moment, pause for a moment, and let's just briefly explain, because there may be someone in the audience who's like, what is
a midwife?
Yeah, right, a midwife. Okay.
Thank you for that, because I do a lot of education around doulas, and midwives are not the same thing. And I feel like there's a missing conversation that happens there. So as a midwife, I've completed my theoretical training. I'm doing the last documentations for licensure. So I'm not licensed in the state of Illinois currently, but I've completed my program. Basically, people in the United States have a few options if they're going to have births, either in a hospital, and they can have that birth in a hospital with a nurse midwife or a doctor or an obstetrician. Right. They can also have a birth in a birth center, which is sometimes attached to a hospital, but usually not. And usually those are staffed by nurse midwives and sometimes certified professional midwives. And then there are people who have births at home, and they can have a birth with either a nurse midwife or a certified professional midwife. Because of the way credentialing works in this country, our system is incredibly fractured in terms of credentialing. But essentially, there are people who deliver babies at home or out of hospital settings, and people deliver babies in hospitals. I'm one of the people who deliver babies in out of hospital settings. So home births is what I do a lot of. And that means, unlike a doula who you might call to help you get through the experience, to support you emotionally and perhaps even physically, a midwife is there to make sure that you and your baby are safe. They're monitoring you and managing your care throughout your pregnancy. And then for usually depends, but between 6 and 12 weeks after. So I am of the latter variety. So I'm not just giving you information. I'm looking at your lab results and saying, I don't like this. I think maybe you need an IV infusion of iron because you're anemic, for example.
Wow.
As well as showing up to catch your baby, because we don't say that we delivered your baby because you did all the work. We just
right.
Yeah.
And I would imagine I've had several. I have an artificial hip, so I've had several surgeries. So I would imagine, not that I'm comparing a hip surgery to having a baby, but I would imagine in regards of stress, having a child at home must lower stress in some way, right?
For some people, it really does. And this is one of the sort of misconceptions about home birth and home birth midwives is that we are advocates for birth at home in any and every circumstance. And that's just not the case, right? There are people for whom this is appropriate and safe. There are people for whom this is appropriate, safe, and they want to. And then there are people who shouldn't be giving birth at home, either because they don't want to give birth at home or because their medical situation necessitates a higher level of care. And so for people who want to, there are people who intellectually really want to have a home birth, but deep down inside, they don't necessarily feel safe. And so for some of those people, they don't actually have births at home because the circumstances and their body, they just don't relax enough in order to complete the process. But for people who want to, it's a really wonderful experience. They essentially, we make sure everybody's stable. We're there for a few hours afterwards to confirm that. And then, they roll over and go to bed.
Wow.
They don't,
right.
they have their baby, they're there, they know how to call us if they need something. They understand what emergency complications are and what's involved with that. We go out if we need to, and usually we go out automatically the next day anyway, just to confirm that everything is still normal. But for a lot of people, it is the most exhilarating and powerful experience that they'll have. I went to birth a few weeks ago, and it was an experience for that parent where they felt they reclaimed something from their first birth.
Wow.
They didn't get to have the experience that they wanted to have with their first birth.
Mm.
And they felt really cheated at that. And so for those first 2 minutes of holding that baby, all they could say is, I did it. I did it. Did you see me? I did it. And what's not beautiful about that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. And you know, birthing is quite literally something that produces humanity and pushes humanity forward, and is something that is fully and completely natural. It's interesting to me how, as we progress in a sense of technology, and we kind of become separated from certain things. You know, before the creation of hospitals, people were having babies, you know, and delivering them and having them normally, naturally, healthy, without any complications. Not to say that, you know, hospitals aren't needed, but this is something that was happening. So it seems to me that being a midwife kind of, as you're saying, reaches back to that natural process. But let me ask, is there some type of evaluation process so that you can evaluate if this woman or if this person needs to, if they can do the home delivery, or if they need to be in a someplace?
Absolutely. That process is ongoing and continuous, and it literally starts from the initial interview when someone seeks care. So it's not oh, yeah, this should be fine, right? Like it's, you know, sometimes hear people say trust birth, and that's true. We trust birth when everything is normal. And so my primary skill as a midwife is observing deviation from normal, because once something is deviated from normal, I know I need to make different choices, right? And so that's a process that happens continually. Like I said, when we were talking about, I mentioned lab values earlier, it happens at every stage of the process. And correct me if I'm wrong, you were just asking me about both this, I guess not just the safety of it, but I'll go back when, I'm sure I'll remember what you were saying. I'm so sorry.
Just the safety, and that it like, as you were saying, it touches into that the natural origins of birth.
Yes. So what I was going to say is that prior to, so there, a lot has been made in this country of the quote disparities between Black perinatal outcomes and the outcomes of everyone else in this country, regardless of income or education level. And I specifically came home from Norway to pursue midwifery in service to Black communities and families because of that. And what we know is that there is a hockey stick in terms of outcomes where things are sort of comparable between races and other demographics. And then it just shoots up in terms of that separation between who's having the worst outcomes. And that happens almost 20 years exactly after something called the Shepard-Towner Act, which is basically the administrative persecution of the grand midwives, right? So prior to this, like the 1940s, Black midwives delivered most of the babies, certainly most Black babies, but even quite a few white babies in like more than half the states. I want to say it's like 23 states. So prior to this, Black midwives were delivering a lot of our babies. And you can
see the nation's babies.
The nation's babies, correct. And you can see a discrepancy from when the Shepard-Towner Act happens, and then that growth in disparities between who's dying, whose baby's dying, and like it just like it's really clear. And so for me, becoming a part of that tradition and part of that revival, because I really like to stress that I'm one of several, right? I'm one of many. There are so many of us who are engaged in doing this work. To me, that is also about reclamation of not just birth as a natural process, but about cultural traditions and connections. Because midwifery is amazing in the sense that it is someone who always treated community like something I did, right? It was like a job that I'm a community worker. Midwifery makes the community very much a two-way street, right? So it's not something that you can hold yourself apart from. You become a part of people's experiences, their families. They will remember you. I sign birth certificates. I do footprints. Like this is like I'm a part of these people's lives and their experiences, for as long as they have that child, for as long as they're alive. And so,
at the beginning of life.
Yeah.
Family, right?
Yeah. So for me, it's a very sacred kind of work. So it is about that, birth is natural and birth is healthy and safe in most instances, but it's also a larger connection.
Right. And we should point out, just to put a little bit of a point on it, that women of color, specifically Black women, you're absolutely right. There's been a fall off that the fatalities of Black women in childbirth. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's a very wide disparity between Black women that have died in childbirth. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's generally 2 to 3 times, regardless of income or education level.
Great.
And what I can tell you, having studied this, is that some of the descriptions that people have of their experiences and how they weren't listened to and how they weren't cared for are so similar that I've had to check dates sometimes, and they're 30 years apart, right?
Yeah.
So it's a part of this larger issue in this country in terms of systemic oppression, right? Because we can trace things like preterm birth to redlining in neighborhoods, and we have a few dozen studies on that. So that it's a part of a much larger problem, but this is my specific lane and skill set that I decided to focus on. So
this is very interesting. I remember, my own mother often tells a story of how when she was in labor with me, she was left alone for like 3 hours, and she would be like asking for help and nothing. In a hospital. She was in. I won't name the hospital, but in a hospital in New York. And nothing, and that's crazy, for any woman to be in that kind of a situation, of any color to be in that kind of a situation. And I think specifically for a Black woman to be in that situation is crazy, because it is a scary time for a woman. You're bringing a new life into the world. The one thing you should have is assurances and security and that feeling that everything's going to be okay. So what you do is so essential, because you're literally ushering in new life into the world, and you're giving those assurances to not just the woman, but to the family, right?
Yeah, it's one of those things where, like I said, I feel it's very special and sacred that people allow me into their space, and into their most intimate time of life, right? This very vulnerable space.
Right.
And I'm just really grateful that I get to do that work, and that people, I try to bring as much comfort as I can, while also, being myself, which is sometimes odd in those ways.
It's amazing. So now let me go back now and ask you, because your birth work as a midwife, your world building as an author, that's 2 different kinds of creation and birthing, right? So what's been most surprising for you, and how has midwifery changed or influenced your approach to writing, to plot, to stakes, to character transformation?
Well, I think the whole process is a transformation, right? Because I'm watching these individuals become a family, either a family of 2, family 3, 8, whatever it is, right? The other thing that I really love, and that I mentioned briefly before, is that midwifery and birth work, as it relates to writing, specifically horror writing, to me is just a continuum. They're not very separate. I feel like birth work is pure body horror for a lot of people. because it's so strange and alien. And people say things like, "Oh, I didn't know they came out like that." I had a sibling attend a birth once, and she was the most precious thing, highly verbal 4-year-old. So I was loving that experience. But she looks at me and she looks at her parents and she looks at her new sibling and she's like, I didn't know they came out looking like that. I thought it would be like maybe Caucasian. It would have a pamper on, and I was like, wow, you really thought that? Okay, right. Most people don't know what a placenta looks like, and then they see one and they're horrified, right? It's a very visceral thing. And since I started doing birth work, I went back. I'm always rewatching some of my horror favorites, but I was like, wow, Poltergeist is really just a rebirthing story from start to finish, and all of it's terrifying. I mean, like literally rebirth, right? She comes out covered in this plasma that looks very much like what people imagine newborns to look like, right? So to me, both the process of writing and the imagination involved in birth work really work well together, because birth is mysterious. For all that we, you were talking earlier about, as we get closer to technological progress, we get further away from other things. I think that has to do with the fact that birth is so mysterious and we can't control it. And so we do what we can to do that, right? Especially if you in a society where a lot of people have anxiety, controlling the process of birth really, it feels better, even if it's not necessarily the best thing, because you can't really control it. We don't even know why people go into labor, right? We have some theories. There are some chemicals involved that we think are responsible, but we don't have, there's not incontrovertible proof that this is what causes somebody who's fully termed to start their labor, right? So it's a little bit of a black box as an experience goes. And so to me, that just makes sense and really works well with my process as a writer. One of the things I started when I started doing clinical practice is just taking little impressions of the births I attended, because I'd like to do an anthology of just birth stories. Because some of the things that happen to me at births are just, wild. The most exciting birth I've attended so far happened in broad daylight on a porch. Yeah, it just, better than coffee. That experience was. It was just very much like, woo! Okay, we're here now. But as far as how those two things knit together, to me, I don't really see a whole lot of difference, I guess.
Right. I think about, for me, I mean, I'm a layman, right? So I think about the Matrix, the first Matrix film, and I think about that scene where Neo has just learned that there's a whole other world, that he's in the Matrix, and that he's been in a fictional computerized world. And when he actually wakes up and he's in this farm and he has to break through this placenta, right?
Yeah.
And and that was obviously done purposefully. That's not just by chance that he's breaking through the placenta into the real world, and that's his birth into the real world. And so, it's also so interesting to me how much of biology and life is still so unexplored, that we still don't understand. Like you said, labor, we still don't understand. There are things about the oceans we still don't understand. There's just so much. And as we push forward, I think it's sometimes necessary to slow down and say, these are things about our own bodies that we should learn, know, and understand, or take time to explore. And you do that in the sense of, at least in my opinion, from listening to you, you're helping these women to slow down, these families to slow down, because I'll tell you, having been a recipient of hospitals, not saying that hospitals are bad, but they get you in and they get you out, and because it's a business, so they get you in and they get you out. And this feels like you're slowing things down, which is I'm sure is appreciated by the families, right?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely slowing things down, except for because babies do what they want. We, again, zero control.
Of course, right.
But it's about, is there a part of this experience that affects you and impacts you in the way you go forth becoming a parent that is meaningful and important beyond is everyone alive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So did you survive this experience is like the bar is under the ground, right? The bar is in hell, right? Did you survive this experience? Great. Like most people going to a hospital or seeking any kind of healthcare expects to survive the experience, right? So what midwifery is frequently about is elevating it beyond is everyone alive, right? It is what was this experience like for you? Was this experience empowering or did it feel traumatic? Did you have the ability to tell your story? And so this is another reason why I feel like midwifery and storytelling are so connected is every part of this process, from my charting to talking to someone before their birth to talking to them after about how they feel about the experience, is about storytelling, right? It's this happened and that happened, and this is what someone told me about their experience. If I'm unable to hear what people are really saying to me, or either in the moment of their birth or like prior to their experience, well, that's not great midwifery care, but it's also not great storytelling, right? Like if I can't lock into what, this is my experience, this is what's happened to me, well, that's going to, everything suffers at that point, right? So helping people to articulate their experience and process it in a way where they think, okay, I hadn't thought of it that way, but yeah, that is what I felt. Or no, to me, this was much more like this, and I wish it could have been like that, right? So that to me is also a part of what I do in a way next to storytelling.
Sure. Do you? And this may be a simple question, but I just bear with me. Do people are they allowed to like play music or have or aromatherapy while they're
whatever they want, which is why they're at home. Yeah,
why they're at home, right?
Because it's truly their experience in their environment. So sometimes I say that I am probably doing home birth and doing birth centers. I might be more of a birth center midwife versus a home birth midwife, and that has to do with just my discomfort, because I've come from these really high acuity facilities, like these teaching hospitals and the largest hospital in the country, those kinds of spaces. And so home birth has been an adjustment period for me because I'm used to having 30 of one thing, and if we use number 30, I can send someone to a storeroom to get number 31, right? Very different experience at home. And so learning to be in someone else's space as a caregiver, it changes the whole thing, right? Because it is their story and you are entering it as a participant, as opposed to they're coming into your workspace and you're telling them how things are about to be.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Let me ask you, because it's something I've been wanting to ask. What's the difference? How can I say this? What's the difference between fear? Because fear is something that I can imagine is tangible in those moments of birthing, and it's natural. It's not unnatural to be afraid, to fear. But what's the difference between fear that are in those moments of birthing, and or is it similar? And fear when you're using when you're writing horror?
Great question. And not someone's asked me before, so I appreciate that. I feel as though one of the things I can really walk people through in terms of their experience as birth is all of that pain, that splitting open that feels like death is actually progress, right? That is actually that discomfort and that terror that you're feeling right now. You meet your baby on the other side of that. And you can't meet your baby without it, right? Versus in a horror setting, what you're coming through all of that terror to find is something new about yourself and how you feel about the world. And so it's a very different, but there's growth in either direction, right? Like you're going to discover something about yourself, either reading horror, right? Horror that has your number, because it's different for everybody, but horror that has your number and a birth experience are very similar in the fact that when it's over with, you're going to say, wow, I did not see that coming. that went better than I thought it would, or I am never ever doing that again, right? Like it is, in that same range of reactions, very similar.
A friend of mine once told me, always do something that you're afraid to do, because after you do it, you'll never be afraid of that thing again. And I've found, for me at least, I found that to be true. I try to lean into things that scare me, because then I've done them. Like, and not saying that you were afraid to go to Norway, but damn, you went to Norway. So that's
I agree. Leaning into things that terrify me. I think my secret is that everything terrifies me, but I do it anyway, right? So it's not that fear ever goes away from me. It's just I learned to manage my fear. And to me, that is also part of writing horror and experiencing things that are extremely challenging. Is the only thing I'm truly afraid of, either as a birth worker or as a writer, is in a situation where I feel like there's nothing else to be done, right? Like either giving up or just, sort of going, ooh, this is, beyond my skill level and I'm out of my depth and I need to walk away from this. That to me is a terrifying prospect. But knowing how to navigate the situation, knowing how to use my resources and ask for help, whether it be writing or midwifery, that's what gets me through every time.
Absolutely. Is there anything else in regards to horror or that appeals to you, or writing specifically that appeals to you?
When we were talking about biological elements and like our knowledge of the human body, one of my kinks as a writer is finding a biological justification for everything. So like, for instance, my vampires are a little bit different in that they process iron differently because of sickle cell, right? And so like, why might that work, right? Well, because we do. Sickle cell is an adaptation to, things like malaria, anemia, etc. And so I like finding ways to put together my medical training and my writing in that way.
I love that. That's a great marriage of horror and science,
which is my thing.
Yeah. Which is your thing. Wow. This has been a fantastic hour. Is there anything else that I haven't touched upon that you want to talk about or mention?
I think what I would encourage people to do is to maybe be a little bit more adventurous with finding work to read and looking under. I feel like short story writing, especially, there's so much rich short story work out there.
Yes.
But I would encourage people to get into anthologies to kind of broaden their horizons a bit. There's a lot of amazing, people who are clamoring for variations in fantasy from Black and brown creators, from queer creators. All that stuff that you're looking for exists, and it's primarily in short story anthologies. So
that's how you started with short stories. Is that right?
Well, I do what we call hybrid publishing. So my long form work is self-published, and my short stories are published by smaller presses. So
in anthologies, right?
Yeah. So like Neon Hemlock, or I just did an anthology. My Horny Houseplant Horror Story is what I call it, because it's an erotic eco-horror anthology, and that's from Hedon Books out of Scotland. So, nice. Yeah, again, botany, because I thought, wow, I did not know that Arthur Conan Doyle poisoned himself while looking for this.
He did.
Yeah. How did that happen? Oh, well, I should probably write about that with this very, very demented perspective.
Yes, I found that out too. I was writing a Doyle story for an anthology for a short story, and I learned that same thing as well. So yeah, short stories is how I started, and short stories, you're absolutely right, is a great place for writers to start and for readers to find different writers, and especially I think writers of color. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, there's just so much beautiful work in the space, and just really challenging and amazing things that I feel like if people knew more, they were more adventurous with those smaller presses, I think they would get what they've been missing from fiction.
Absolutely. So we are going to put all of the links to all of the things that you do in the show notes. So, and I encourage everyone here to go and take a look. Not just because this is the time of vampires and sinners and all that, but please take a look at Winifred's work. She's tapping into things that are really powerful and poignant. And I would want to say, Winifred, it's been an incredible hour speaking with you. Thank you very much. And I also want to say thank you to my audience, which I absolutely love. And thank you for the participation in this incredible community. And if you're new here, we want to ask you to please like and subscribe to the show so that we can keep this conversation going, and conversations with incredible individuals like Winifred that we just had. And here at Soul Story, our goal is always to have authentic discussions. So if you've enjoyed our guests and conversations, and we ask you to consider supporting the show, or if you want to get your brand in front of our loyal audience, then please click the link in the show description or visit sci-fi sisters.com/sponsors to become part of this and all of the Sci-Fi Sisters Inc. conversations. Winifred Burton, thank you so much for this hour. It has been an absolute joy. Thank you so much.
I so appreciate that you had me. Thank you, Derek, and thank you to Sci-Fi Sisters for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.